Mark, as somebody with a master's in mental health counseling and an expert in romantic relationships, why do you think so many couples are struggling to sustain a happy and thriving relationship?
One of the things that people don't seem to understand is that love is a learned skill set. We have to learn how to love. A lot of people are just winging it. And a lot of people assume they know how to have relationships because they are going to do the same thing their family did. Well, if your family was dysfunctional, that's a really bad idea. And a lot of people do come from dysfunctional families. But even if your family was a healthy family and you were very happy growing up in your family, every family has its own version of odd and quirky and just plain weird. And that's okay. It works. But when you go out into the world with other people who come from other families that have their own version of odd and quirky and weird, it doesn't always match up very well. And so we often go into life believing that if our family was healthy, we just know how to have healthy, happy, thriving relationships. And that's just not true. There's still a lot to learn of how to build healthy relationships with other people outside your family unit. And then that's best case scenario. If you were raised in a dysfunctional family, a toxic family, if you were abused as a child, then you have a very warped view of what love is from that family. And there needs to be some healing for that. And when we bring that into relationships, it's a struggle as well. What we go to school to learn a job or a trade. We go to college, we go to trade school. If we want to take up a hobby, it's very likely we're going to read books or watch YouTube videos or even go to a professional. If you want to take up golf, you might take some golf lessons at the local golf course from the local pro. We put a lot of effort into learning things that we want to be involved in, but when it comes to relationships, we tend to just wing it. We tend to just do what our family did. And if you ask somebody, why do you do that? They'll say, well, that's just the way I was raised. Well, that's the worst reason to do something because it just doesn't work in the world with other people. And so I think the reason it is so hard to find thriving relationships, one major reason is that we don't understand love as a learned skill set and we haven't put the effort into actually learning it.
You said a lot about, a lot of interesting things there. One, yes, when it comes to the dysfunctional families, and if we remove all the toxicity from a few of the families or a few of the upbringings for some people, but we see how maybe that person was somewhat neglected, or that person, again, it wasn't the happiest environment. Everyone has faced traumas in childhood only because the way that our brain created stories around a specific event. It- you can have the perfect family, and yet you'll face some sort of trauma or some sort of emotional wound. Having said that, one thing that I've learned and realized that when you are in those environments, when you grow up, then you tend to be attracted or drawn to people that remind you of that. You look for that familiarity. You want to suffer in familiar ways, and then you don't realize that. And then when you get into relationships and you feel like, okay, I understand how this is done, because on a nervous system level, it feels the same as growing up. And I had a pretty decent childhood, even though it was kind of dysfunctional. How, when it comes to that, how can somebody become aware of the patterns that they are applying into their life, and breaking free from those, and start healing? Because at the end of the day, many people, as you said, they think, well, this is just who I am. A lot of people feel that they already know what they're doing, as you said, and that is a very arrogant way of seeing things, obviously. But I think it's a lot of ignorance. And when you talk about learning these skills, when it comes at a very deep level, that is very vulnerable. And I think women might be better at addressing those issues than men. How can people just, once again, become aware of it and start addressing in a way that feels safe for them?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. When we grow up in a family, regardless of what dynamics are going on, we assume that that's normal. That becomes our normal. And so you're exactly right. When we start finding people that kind of fit that same rhythm of life, those same kind of behavior patterns, even if they're entirely destructive, there is a feeling of normalcy and a feeling of being drawn to that, even when we know that it's bad for us. And so there has to be, if we're going to overcome that, um, a place that we get to a higher level of thought, that we're not just having instinctive reactions. Because one of the things about our brains is it's pretty primitive sometimes. It is drawn to the familiar. And I love the way you said it. We will suffer in familiar ways. We would rather suffer in a familiar way than to try something different. And the reason for that is our brains are there to try to protect us. And even if it was dysfunctional, even if it was difficult, if we came through that and we survived it, our brain knows that. And our brain says, well, you survived that, so we know we can. If we do this other different thing, we don't know what's going to happen. And our brains, just in that primitive mode of how do we survive? How do we make it? And it's not just physical survival, but it's an emotional survival. Our brains need to protect us emotionally and physically from danger. And so even if it's unpleasant, even if it's difficult, if we survived it, if we made it through, our brains say, we know we can make it through that. We don't know how to make it through the other, so that seems more scary. And that's just a primitive, instinctive, protect ourselves kind of reaction. And that's normal. That's just the way our brains function. But we do have the ability to have a higher level of thought than that. And it is about awareness. It's about being aware of what you just said, that you know we have to overcome that sort of primitive, use the word ignorance, and that's what it is. It's just we don't know better because our brains just got into that. And so overcoming that, having that higher level of thought and really asking ourselves, what do we want? Do we want to go back to that? Is that we just want to suffer the normal suffering, or do we want something better? That gets us into at least a direction. The other thing I would say is don't keep secrets. One of the things that happens is we just kind of go with the flow of what was normal to us, and we never even ask somebody. We never even talk about it. Talk to your friends about their relationships. Talk to them about how you're feeling, and the best thing you can do if you know you came from a difficult background is get a counselor, get a therapist, get a relationship coach, find somebody that can help you. Because my goodness, we go to doctors for our physical health, we go to dentists for our teeth, we go to a mechanic for our car. Why would we do anything less for our mental health, our emotional health, and the relationships that mean so much to us?
Yeah, I when you were saying that our brains are trying to keep us safe, it's true, and our brains are not designed to make us happy. Our brains are not designed to help us thrive. It's the only goal is to keep us safe. And because we, as you say, because we went through that, is we can our brains can predict how it's going to go, and anything that is unpredictable, we don't want to deal with that. Which now, when you were saying all that, it made me think, if that's true, right? Because again, our brains will just try to go into what's familiar, what we can predict. We don't like uncertainty. How can we step into a new environment, a new experience, when we don't know how things are going to go? Even if we heal that past, but anything new, once again, is new. How can we bring our nervous system to a point that of possibilities, of good possibility, instead of being that fear of that is new, that is unfamiliar, I don't know what is going to go? Because at the end of the day, our brains would rather live in the current hell than in something great after. Because again, as you said, we don't know. And to me, sure, having therapy or going to through counseling can help a lot of people. Once again, I feel that women are better than this than men. Men now is starting to change a bit. A lot of men are going to therapy. For me, I was quote unquote lucky, since I've been going to therapy since I was like 7 or 8. I think just because I had ADHD, and to me, therapy has always been normal. I mean, nothing to me has been, if I'm struggling with something, whether it's depression or something, I'll just find somebody and address it. But not many people are as lucky, and there is that fear of, there's either the taboo that will make us weak, one, or the second is, no, that doesn't work for me. I've known many men, all, and it's like, no, that is not for me, that is not going to work out. Well, that is your brain being afraid of something new, right? When we come to this, it's like, it's kind of like a two-part question. I guess this would be more addressed for men. How can men become more comfortable with that, with just seeking help in a place where, when you're being taught to repress your emotions, to not really feel, and to only express anger, no sadness, no depression, no hopelessness, no nothing, how can they just embrace those and lean more into that? That's the first question. And the second is, in your experience, once we heal some parts, how can we teach our nervous system to be okay with the unknown, with something that is not familiar, in a healthier relationship?
Yeah. Yeah, the idea that counseling has a stigma or a taboo, I think, is just tragic. It's wrong. With all due respect, that's to anybody who believes that, you're just wrong. There is nothing wrong with going to therapy. I've been in therapy on various occasions, and I am a therapist. Doctors go to doctors, dentists go to dentists, therapists go to therapists. Everyone needs help along the way. The idea that we don't need help at some point is absurd. Everyone needs help. Now, to your question, a lot of people do say, well, talking about it's not going to help. Why would I want to sit and talk to a stranger about my problems? And what I say to that is, don't knock it till you've tried it, because it is amazing what happens when you say things out loud, when you have to articulate things and you're getting feedback from someone who has some skill set in that area of giving feedback, of helping to frame these things and explore these ideas. Because what happens, again, going back to our brain, when something bothers us, our brain is going to ruminate on it. It's going to continue to go over it and over and over it. And when we say it out loud and we actually have to articulate it, it makes it real. And it's amazing how many times we can do just that. We can say it out loud and it becomes real, and we can see it and understand it, and it's not quite as scary. I did have a guy come to me one time. His wife actually pushed him into it, and he was really resistant. And I said, well, what are you resistant? Why are you resistant to come here? And he said, well, I already know what you're going to say. I said, all right, what do you think I'm going to say? And he goes into what kind of things he heard counselors say on television, and the stereotypes. And I said, actually, I don't want to say any of that. What I would like to say, and I went into a few things that I wanted him to think about, and he was intrigued. And I said, did you expect me to say that? He said, not at all. I said, is that at all helpful? He said, that's actually extremely helpful. And I think a lot of people experience that in counseling. They go in thinking they're going to experience one thing, and it's actually very, very different. I've never heard someone that has been in counseling that regretted it. Now, I have heard of people say, I went to this particular counselor and that person wasn't particularly good. You could say that about doctors and lawyers and ministers and teachers, that everybody has, or every profession has individuals that just aren't skilled, or they're just not a good match. That's okay. Find someone else. But people who have been involved in counseling, I have never heard someone say, I wish I hadn't done that. That was a waste of time, or that did more harm than good. Never have I heard that. Every single person that has gone to counseling, who has taken the time to find the right counselor, find a good match, has always said that it helped. Now, how do we get to a place that we're going to be in once we go through this and do some healing? How do we get to that place that we can have that higher level of thought? We can get past a lot of these hurts. We grieve these hurts. We go through a place of healing. One of the things that really helps us engage in truly thriving, healthy relationships is the idea that we have to love ourselves first. And one of the reasons people struggle in relationships is they're looking to be validated in order to appreciate or like or love themselves. They're looking to have other people come into their life, love them enough where they begin to appreciate and love themselves. And that sounds logical, but it never works. Brene Brown's done some great research in this area, some great writing. Other people have as well. That you cannot love other people more than you love yourself. And if we are going to get to that higher level, that healing and that place where we can have healthy relationships, we have to learn to love ourselves. And these hurts and these struggles, and particularly coming out of dysfunctional families, what we haven't learned is how valuable we are. And we're looking to have other people validate us to try to find that somehow. And that's why we rush into relationships so much. One of the things that you can do is learn to love yourself first. And then once you do that, you can actually take your time in relationships. You can learn and grow in that relationship. We feel very rushed very often because we're looking to fill a void in our life and we're looking to find a person that will fill it. If we love ourselves first and we love other people because we love ourselves, then we can take our time, we can grow in that relationship. We have the peace and the contentment to be able to actually build a healthy relationship rather than rushing into it trying to fill a void. And the reason I say that we have to love ourselves first is that love is not a commodity like money. If we need more money, we can, take out a loan at a bank or borrow from a friend or maybe work some overtime or get a second job. But love is different. It's grown within us. It's organic. It's a spiritual, human emotion. It has to be grown within us. And when it is, it can be given away. And so it's vital if we're going to form healthy relationships to take our time in that. And the only way to feel unrushed is to love ourselves first and have that level of peace and contentment.
Yeah. See, a lot of the things that you said, it just made a ton of sense. And a lot of them sound fairly simple, but they're hard to do. And the part of loving ourselves, sure, I do feel that probably, perhaps, and this is just an entire, I mean, this is just my perception. I could be completely wrong. I think that a lot of relationships that maybe don't work is because one person loves the other one way more than they love themselves. But as you said, is because again, I kind of experienced it in my marriage where I was loving my ex-wife way more than I love myself, and I think she did the same. And when that happens, then it creates a lot of, if things go wrong or things go, you're in a low moment, you hit some obstacles, then not loving yourself can bring a lot of the fears, insecurities, and self-doubts that you have. but but here is the thing. I understand why we do it. I understand why we're trying to seek validation, because we know that we are biased. So it's almost like, okay, I need some proof or some evidence that I should love myself, right? Because me just thinking about it is not gonna. What if I'm delusional? What if I'm not supposed to love myself? Or what if I'm supposed to improve something? So I need to, I guess that's how our brains might think, or at least that's how my brain thinks. Maybe if I have a few people that can give me permission to love myself, maybe I can. But again, it doesn't work because you're going to keep looking for evidence and more and more and more people just to do that. Why is so hard to love ourselves?
It's because we tend to judge ourselves based on what's happened to us rather than our own innate value as a person. And sometimes those things that happen to us are our own fault. It's our own mistakes. So we're not going to neglect that. But sometimes it's the mistakes of other people. Sometimes it's just life happens and bad things happen along the way. But stuff's going to happen to us. And we tend to judge ourselves based on what has happened from our own mistakes, from other people's mistakes, and from life. And that's a bad judgment, because if we judge ourselves or anyone that way, everybody fails, because life is just like that. Stuff's going to happen. What we have to get to, if we're going to love ourselves, is to understand our own innate value. And the way I illustrate this, let's imagine that I have a diamond the size of a baseball that's perfectly cut, perfectly clear, perfect in every way. That's utterly priceless. Now, if I take that diamond and I take it out into a rural area and find some nice farmland and roll it around in the muck and the mire and the cow manure, when I bring it back in, it's still priceless if you know what it is. But if you judge it based on what happened to it, you're just going to think it's a great big mess. And that's what we have to understand, that we have an innate value as a human being, that we are valuable and we have something to contribute to this life and we have value in who we are. And stuff's going to happen. And if we just judge ourselves based on the stuff that is on us and has happened to us, we're all going to fail. But if we understand our own value, it's a whole different perspective. And the work of things like counseling, for instance, is to start getting past that stuff that's happened, getting past all that muck and mire and cow manure, and get to who we really are. For that matter, the work of faith and grace and religion is to get past all that stuff and see our own innate value. The work of philosophy is to get past a lot of that stuff and to see the true nature of humanity. There's a lot of people, a lot of lines of thought, and a lot of schools of thought working on this same problem from different angles, all of them to say we're not what happened to us. We are of innate value as a human being. And that's what we need to discover. The delusion isn't that we would love ourselves. The delusion is that we are the stuff that happened to us. That's not who we are. That's what happened. And we can address what has happened to us. If it's our mistake, the good news there is we can fix it. That's in our power to fix. We make mistakes, but we can learn from that and do better. If it's other people's mistakes, we may need to set boundaries. Maybe we even have to end relationships with toxic or abusive people in order to be healthy ourselves. But we can make better choices. We can learn from experiences of life. We can address the stuff that happened to us, but it doesn't affect who we innately are. That's a big lesson to learn. It's not the way we usually think, but it's actually the truth of who we are. It is a delusion to think that we are only what has happened to us in this life. We are much more valuable than that.
I'm glad you said that because one thing that helped me go through my divorce was reframing, right? As you said, a lot of people, many people have this victim's mindset that things are happening to me. Why is this happening to me? And they get caught up in the vicious cycle of thinking negatively. It's almost like everything is like nothing's in your power. You're not in control of anything. True, we can only control our thoughts and our actions. But the way that I was able to overcome that and to reframe it was okay, things are not happening to me, but things are happening for me. I'm going to learn something from this. This is happening for a reason. And something that helped me truly embody that or truly believe it, because we can say, we can use different reframes or change our story, but if we don't believe that story, it's never going to change our emotional response to the event. So I came across a couple of years ago with this definition or just a quote of the ironic tragedy that life has to be lived forward, but it only makes sense in reverse or in retrospect. So we have gone through a lot of stuff in our past, death of loved ones, sickness or breakups, or we lost our jobs, whatever. And at that moment, we felt overwhelmed. We felt that the world was going to end. And then when we have enough separation between us and the event, we can see how that thing that we hated that happened needed to happen in order to make us to who we are today. And I think that helped me a lot in terms of saying things are happening to me. Why is this happening to me? It's like, how is this happening for me? How can I use this in the future? And I think if people can just reframe and change that, they can just take more ownership and take the power back instead of feeling like a victims. But another thing you said about our innate value, I wonder if the reason why it's so hard to see it is because we cannot truly measure. We can measure how much money we have. We can sort of measure, quote unquote, how attractive we are, even though that's subjective. But again, some people are going to be more attractive than other ones. We can measure how fit we are and all, but we cannot measure our innate value. Okay, how kind I am, or I don't know, or how generous or how respectful, how those things are so hard to measure, almost impossible, that in our heads we don't even see it because we cannot put a number on it. So how can we get more? How can we accept or just recognize our innate value when we cannot measure it?
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic point. We do tend to be drawn to these easy things we can measure. Are we wealthy? Are we great looking? Are we, this or that, athletic, whatever it is? And those things are measurable, and we can take pride in those things. And a lot of a lot of people in the world, it benefits them to show you how you do not measure up. There are a lot of power dynamics. It helps some people to kind of keep you in your place, to push you down, for them to feel better about themselves, and to point out your flaws, and to point out how you've done wrong. And those people might be in our own family. They might be the people closest to us that will find some level of enjoyment, perhaps, or something, of pushing you down and reminding you how you failed, and reminding you how you're not good enough. That's a power dynamic. And what we have to understand is we don't have to be the victim of that. We don't have to listen to that. It's hard. These are not easy things. I don't want to sound like this is simplistic. It is very difficult to do. That's why I do recommend counseling if you're struggling with this, because it's going to take some time and some work to get here. But you can do that. It is possible to do it. You don't have to stay in that place of listening to these things. It is coming to an understanding that we don't have to be a victim just because it benefits somebody else. It benefits their power structure to push us down. And there's a lot of people doing that. That happens in family dynamics to keep people in their place. It happens in communities. It happens on the national scale to divide people and get people fighting with one another. It plays to the benefit of some people in power. When we allow ourselves to be defined by these other people for their own purposes, that's not a very good measure. And when we start recognizing that, it's pretty easy to see that doesn't make sense. Why would I let somebody else measure me of my value for their benefit? Because they have an issue, because it helps them to feel good about themselves to put me down. That's when we start saying this stuff out loud, it doesn't really make sense that we would do that. And so getting to the place that we're recognizing it, being aware of it, not just these knee-jerk reactions, not just these primitive brain reactions, but really looking at how do we build these healthy relationships, starting with ourselves. And when we start saying out loud, I don't need to necessarily believe what they say about me just because they say it. When it benefits them to say it, I need to look at what benefits me and builds me up, because it's not just selfish. I can love them better. If I love myself, I can have more capacity to love them even in their flaws. So it actually benefits them in the long run too.
Yeah, I mean it's tough, and recognizing and becoming aware, and that's something that's a practice I've been applying lately into my life. That if someone says something to me or somebody reacts in a negative way, I'm trying to think is about their own pain. It's not about me. It's about their own pain. It's not about me. It takes time. It takes time to accept it because we still have. I mean, we have been carried for decades what people have said to us when we didn't know this new framing, when we didn't know that the person was saying it because he was trying to feel better about themselves rather than really talking about your shortcomings. So I guess it takes time to. I think it's a daily reminder, and when it comes to the value, obviously it comes a lot. I would assume that part of not knowing our innate value, not loving ourselves enough, and all these kind of things, and the misconceptions that we might have about relationships, marriage. I think that's why. And we were talking off cameras how, according to some organization, like roughly like 56% of the marriage and in divorce, and that's without even counting those who stay together for because of the money or kids or religious reasons. So I think it is fair to say, as we were talking, like 8 out of 10, marriages are not happy, are technically speaking unsuccessful. If you count as a successful marriage, happy and thriving relationship. As somebody like you, that you have experienced both a good and bad marriage, what makes a marriage good, and what are the signs that you are in a bad marriage?
Yeah, I think we do have to strive for happy. I think happy is a great measure. That's not trivial. Having a joyful, happy, healthy, thriving relationship is not a trivial thing. Yeah, there's going to be problems along the way. We get that. But even overcoming those together in a relationship is a joy. That there's a joyful, uh, deep joy in that. And so, seeking a happy relationship is the goal, and a lot of people do struggle with that. We do see, as you said, a high divorce rate. And of those that stay together, not all of them want to stay together. You correctly point out they stay together for religion or for money or for children or a number of reasons. And so I think we've just sort of accepted that that's the case. And we haven't asked the question, how do we beat the odds? That how do we be the people that choose to learn the skill sets of love and relationships so that we beat the odds? Because we see in those numbers, if we just wing it, if we just do what our families did, we're probably going to not get great results. Maybe some people stumble into it and have a healthy, happy relationship anyway. But if we're just winging it, it's with those kind of numbers of a 50% divorce rate, give or take, and how many, we don't know. How many people are just staying together because they have reasons to stay together other than love and joy in that relationship? That's a big number. And you put it at maybe 80% of people either get divorced or want to. And I wouldn't be able to argue with that number. That very well could be the case. And that puts us in a place that if we're going to do it, we have to beat the odds. We have to put ourselves in a place where we're learning and growing and not just winging it, but we're going to a counselor or we're talking to people that are wise in our life in order to overcome these struggles. We are working to love ourselves. That is key. You can't get past that. You have to love yourself first in order to love other people. And one of the little tricks that I would say is when people say, well, I just feel like I can't get it right, or I just feel like I've made so many mistakes that I can't go past this, and I just can't feel good about myself because of these things, or whatever we say to ourselves. Always ask yourself, who made that rule? When we say things of, well, I just do that because that's the way my family did it. Who made the rule you have to do it like your family? Well, I've just always felt bad about myself. I don't know that I could ever really love myself. Who made that rule that you have to feel bad about yourself? Uh, and when we start asking that question, that leads us to a really important place, because the reality is usually we're making the rules. We're deciding this. We're deciding that we have to do it the way our family did it, or we're deciding that we're of no real value because of the things that's happened to us. Some other people might be saying that, but that doesn't make them right. They may be putting us down, but we're choosing to accept what they said. Who said that we have to accept their version of the truth? We said that if we're accepting it. And the good news is when we ask ourselves that question, who made that rule? It usually comes back that we made the rule. And that means we can change it. And we don't have to do things the way our family did it. We don't have to just continually put ourselves down and criticize ourselves all the time, even though it's gotten to be quite a habit of doing for a lot of us. And we spent maybe decades of just constant criticism and negative talk. That's still a rule we made. We've set that pattern, and that means we can change it. Can we just snap our fingers and change it overnight? No. It's probably going to take some time and some help and some therapy. That's okay. We get to change those things, though, because we're the ones setting these rules. If somebody else said it, fine. Let's understand that. But most of the time, when we say, who made the rule that we have to think that way or act that way or have that kind of relationship, it's usually us. We bought into something without even evaluating it. It just came from our family or our past or our knee-jerk reaction or our primitive brain. And we never even evaluated why we're following that rule. Why do we criticize ourselves constantly, but then reject any compliments that come our way? Why do we do that? Who made the rule that we have to do that? Well, we did. And we can now change that.
Yeah, I've been a big proponent on reaching our full potential, or being happier, or having better relationships, or better, you know better relationships romantically, with friends, with family, with money, all of that, by having a deeper understanding of the mind. And as you said, who created that rule? Our brains created a story around an event just to help us understand it, period. That doesn't mean that the story is accurate, doesn't mean that the story is true. In fact, I mean, our minds are very unreliable narrators. We don't, the stories can be very different always. As you said, it's our choice, it's our brain, we can change that. I think what people don't understand or don't see is when you're trying to change that, that is a threat to our identity, we have been for decades, to the self, and that can feel very uncomfortable. And as you said, I mean, as we mentioned earlier, our body, our brain is gonna, it's gonna try to keep us safe. So is when we understand why we feel the way that we feel, why we feel such a resistance, because we are threatening our old identity, or what we want to be our old identity, and create a new one. If we understand that on a conscious level, and then it's okay, I'm supposed to feel this way, I can push through this and get it to the other side and be a better version of myself. But the uncomfort I'm feeling is not because I'm incapable, it's because it's new, and because our brains are want to remain everything familiar, everything predictable. So I guess that can help a lot, and I'm glad you pointed out, because at the end of the day, it's our choice. But I wonder if, let's say, we have a 70 to 80% quote unquote failure rate when it comes to marriages or relationships in general. I wonder if it's had anything to do with the expectations that we have, how things should look and feel like. So in your opinion, do you think that we have unrealistic expectations on how relationships or marriages should look and feel like, and that's why when we don't meet those expectations, we feel that they're not good enough, therefore it has to come to an end?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely a problem. And one of the things that I think happens is, again, we listen to other people, and instead of evaluating what do we want, what are we setting as our goal for this relationship, and the things that we think would make it thrive, we are sort of buying into patterns. And so we're told, go get your education, whatever that might mean, get your job, get a promotion, make some good money as much as you can, buy the house, find that special someone, get married, have kids, maybe move into a bigger house when you have kids. And then you get into, say, your 30s or 40s, and you've done all of those things. And so many people say, is this it? Is this really what I'm doing? And we buy into this idea that if we just check off all the stereotypes and we just follow all the rules, that we'll be happy, when the very people that are telling us those rules aren't necessarily happy. Now, I'm not saying those things are bad. Certainly get the job, make the money, buy the house, have the kids. All these things are great things. But let's understand that we're doing that not just to do them. They're not automatically going to make us happy, but we're doing those to build the life we want, that is a thriving relationship. And so those are means to an end. They're not the end in itself. They're not going to just magically create a great relationship. And in order to do that, we do have to learn the new skill sets. We do have to learn what builds a great relationship, learn what love is, learn the skill set, build those things. And it is going to feel odd at first. I think you're exactly right when you point out it's going to feel weird. Let it feel weird. That's okay. When we start getting past some of these stereotypes of relationships and start building thriving ones, it's going to feel just so strange. And the reason for that is, again, going back to our brain. When we have a thought, it forms that little neural pathway, those, in order to have that thought. And if we have that thought repeatedly, and if other people around us are giving us that thought and that encouragement as well, it forms this great big super highway of neural pathways where that information just flies through. So for instance, if we're accustomed to criticizing ourselves, and kind of putting ourselves down in our own mind, those thoughts are going to form these huge neural pathways to very easily do that. But if we try to compliment ourselves or accept a compliment, it's just going to feel weird. And the reason for that is we haven't formed the neural pathways yet. And so let it feel weird. Do it anyway. It's like any other skill set. When you take up basketball, you didn't just take the basketball for the first time and know how to be LeBron James or Michael Jordan or Steph Curry. It takes time to learn the skill set to play basketball. And relationships are more complicated than a sport. And so take the time to learn these things. And when it feels weird, well, when you first shot a basketball, it felt weird. The first time you tried to cook a meal, it just seemed odd. How do you put all those ingredients together? Even if they're listed in the recipe, it feels odd to do it at first. There's a lot of insecurity, and our brains just are continually saying, "I don't know how to do this." But when we do it for a while, we form those neural pathways, and it can become just as easy to feel good about yourself as it used to be to feel bad about yourself. And it can be just as easy to have healthy, happy conversations and healthy relationships and conversations within that relationship as it was to have fights that you used to have in your family. It can be just as natural. It just takes time and experience to do it.
Yeah, that is fascinating because I don't remember when we started feeling like if we were bad at something, or if something was hard for us, or if something felt odd, we were not meant to do that. In what way? When we learn how to walk, we never thought, after we fell 1,000 times, we never thought about, yeah, this walking is not for me. Or when we learn how to ride, or when we learn how to read. But I will
Yes.
say though, Mark, I will say, and I think that a lot of people probably experience the same thing. When I was learning how to drive, I was like, I don't know if I'm able to ever learn because I have to pay attention to so many different things, and it's overwhelming and it felt weird and I was scared. I was like, okay, I need to pay attention to all the cars in front of me, behind me, to my sides. I need to pay attention to the speed. I need to pay attention to a lot of things. I don't think driving is for me. But again, because it's a necessity, we eventually go, you know, jump that fence, and then we feel, okay, now I can do it, and now we can literally drive from point A to point B without realizing we did it because our brains created those automatic behaviors. But as you said, it's true. I feel that, and I did this for many years in other areas of my life. When I would try something for a week, I would try something for a month, whether it's even as simple as feel, write three things I'm grateful for, and that's okay. This is pointless. I don't feel anything, and then I will try for a week. Okay, this is pointless. I'm not gonna do it because it felt weird. It felt like I'm not feeling what I'm supposed to feel. Therefore, this is not for me. And I think a lot of people quit, including myself. Did it in the past. We try something, it doesn't feel right. It feels odd. It's like, okay, this is not for me. I'm done. I wonder when we stop feeling I wonder when we actually start having those thoughts that when we try something new, we're supposed to be at the very least decent at it rather than just being bad and then work our way up.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's take an example of a golfer. And let's say, I go out, I've never played golf before, and I swing at the ball and it goes directly into the water. And I have the thought, I can't play this game. Obviously, I have evidence now. I tried, I failed, the ball's in the water, I'm done. Now, let's take a professional golfer who knows they can play golf. They hit the ball in the water sometimes too. But what they say at that point is, well, I can't play this game. No, they don't say that. They say, I have to adjust my swing. There was a small adjustment I need to make here. I made a mistake in that swing, and I need to adjust that and pay attention to the mistake I made and not make that one again. And it's just a small adjustment that they make because they know they can play golf. They just make mistakes along the way. And that's what we have to get to, is understanding that those mistakes are going to happen, especially when we're new at it. Those new actions are going to take some time. But when we understand our own value, a golfer understands they're a golfer. They just make mistakes and they have to make adjustments. When we understand that we are a people of love, that we are created for relationships, and we deserve healthy relationships in our life, even if we haven't had them to this point. And we can build them because love is a learned skill set. Even when we have the failures in our past, and even when we're struggling now to kind of get our mind around some of these things, we can say, I am worthy of love. I am a creation of love. I am a person of value, and I'm not going to judge myself based on every bad swing I make, every mistake I make, or everything that happens to me. I'm going to judge on who I am, and I'm going to make adjustments so I'm not making those mistakes, that I'm having better relationships. Again, that takes time. It's not easy. And I think you pointed out something very important. When we're learning how to drive, you said, there's a million different things to be thinking about, and that can feel overwhelming. And relationships are like that. It feels like there's a million different things to deal with, and how do we do all of that? And that's where I try to help. In my book, I wrote a book called Learning Love, and I teach the 5 components of love. I have broken everything down into 5 components so that we can look and say, we don't have to look at a million different pieces. We can look at 5 components, and all of them are important, and they're not in any particular order. All 5 are important, but some of them are going to come naturally to us. We learned them in our family. Others we may be missing. So when we look at our relationship and we think, well, I thought I was doing okay, but something's missing, we can actually look and conceptualize it and see, this is the component that's missing. This is the area I need to be working on. And that's what I try to bring, that value of making this a practical thing rather than just an overwhelming emotion, whether it being a million moving parts that we don't know where to start. I can give you 5 components that we learn and practice in order to build those healthy relationships in the art of learning love. And that's why I'm passionate about this, because I believe it can be learned, and it's so important to learn it. My book is coming out in June from Morgan James Publishing. I'm very excited about that. Be available wherever books are sold. And I hope that people will read it and see that you don't have to be scared of relationships. It is an undertaking. It's not easy, but it can be a learned skill set for anybody, regardless of your background.
And what are those 5 components?
The first one is grief, because everyone is going to get hurt. Life is going to beat you up sometimes, and people are going to have emotional scars, and we have to have a comeback story. If we're not careful, we'll use the grief and the pain of life to put up emotional walls, to put up barriers, and what we think we're doing is protecting ourselves. What we're actually doing is building our own emotional prison, where we're lonely, even in a crowd, because we're keeping everybody out. When we have that ability to grieve, we have the ability to come back and stay engaged in relationships, even with the emotional scars. The second one is emotion. That's the one everyone knows about. We need to have an emotional connection. That's easy for some people. For others, particularly those who have been hurt, it can be harder, but that's a learned skill set. We learn to practice, slowly practice, if we need to, being vulnerable enough to say, I love you, being vulnerable enough to open up and say that I really do care, and listen to people and know that we can express ourselves. And that takes time to build that emotional connection for some people. That's okay. Take your time. But that emotional connection is vitally important if we're going to have deep, caring relationships. The third one is practicality. Emotion brings us together. Practicality keeps us together. These are the practical ways that we live together well. We make financial decisions. We figure out the chores around the house. We make parenting decisions. We take care of our mental health. That is a practical decision, because things like depression and anxiety are a terrible toll on us, but it also takes a toll on our relationships, and those are treatable conditions. So a practical reality is taking care of yourself physically and mentally as much as possible, emotionally, to be engaged in a healthy way in that relationship. And also practicality means setting boundaries with some relationships, or maybe even ending some, because they are toxic and abusive. And if you want healthy relationships, the practical reality is you have to make room for them, because toxic, abusive relationships will consume you. So you have to get those out of your life, or at least limit those, in order to build healthy relationships, to have room to build healthy relationships. The fourth we've talked about, it's loving yourself, accepting who you are, accepting your own value, having compassion for yourself, taking care of yourself. All of these things are vital if we're going to have compassion and caring and love for other people. It comes from within us, and we have to build that self-love first in order to love other people. And finally, the fifth one is passion, which is a passion for life, which means really you just enjoy your life. I mean, life is serious, so that's why practicality is the third component. And life is tragic sometimes, and that's why grief is the first component. But let's not forget that life can be fun, and it's not always, but it can be. And so we need to look for that. Again, our brains aren't going to look for it unless we force ourselves to and learn to, because our brains are going to be on guard for what could hurt us physically or emotionally. There's not an instinct. There is no human instinct to seek out fun. It's always there to look out for danger. We have to learn to do that. And sometimes in the grind of life and working and taking care of kids and taking care of a household or going to school or whatever it is, we get into that grind and we forget to have fun with the very people we love. Fun is a healthy thing, it is a vital thing. And keeping that fun in our life as much as possible can help build that healthy relationship and help that emotional connection at the same time. So that's a very quick overview. But if we are able to grieve the hurts of life and come back from that, we're able to connect emotionally. We live together well in a practical way. We love ourselves first in order to love other people. And we have fun as much as possible with the people we love. That can build a healthy relationship in any area of life. And so we can look then and say, all right, so we have an emotional connection and we're living together pretty well, and we've come through some tough times and we've grieved through those. We're doing that pretty well, but something's missing. It may be passion. It may be that you've forgotten to have fun, or maybe you're not loving yourself, or you might have heard somebody say, well, I love them, but I just can't live with them. Those are people that have a strong emotional connection, but they failed in the area of practicality. And so this is how we conceptualize all these million moving parts into 5 components that we can look at and say which ones are working. Have we grieved the hurts of life so that we're open to relationships? Are we connected emotionally? Well, maybe we're falling down on the practical stuff. We're just not living together well. We got to make better decisions together to live together well. Or maybe we're just not having fun. We can look and see what's happening in our life and then focus on that. And again, go to a therapist and say, these things we're doing right, but I think we're falling down in this area. I need some help. And when we have those 5 elements in our life, those components working all together, we can build those healthy relationships, even if we've been through a divorce, even if we've been through a difficult life in some way or from a dysfunctional family. It can work for everybody in every area. And so that's why I wrote the book, because I believe it's a practical guide to how to build the skill set of love.
Yeah, I appreciate you giving that lengthy answer because it brings clarity. And I think that what is happening with a lot of things, whether we struggle on an internal level, at work, in relationships, it's just a lack of clarity. It's like you kind of deconstruct these components into even behaviors associated with them. And once we know what we should look for or how we should act like, behave like, okay, now I can sort of have, it's almost like a compass. I have a better understanding of where I'm heading, what I should look for in the future. But one thing that you mentioned about grief, and this is someone said this to me a while back. I don't remember who it was. I wish I could, because I would like to give them credit. But that this person said, grief is all the unspent love we carry for those we have lost. It's okay to be sad, right? Because for me, it was like I shouldn't. After 6 months, I was like, I shouldn't feel grief anymore. I should be okay. It's like, well, grief is not linear. It's going to happen in so many different ways. You need to let it happen. It's okay to be sad. Because I don't know for women, but at least for men, we feel like, well, I'm supposed to get it over with and then just move on. It's like, no, you spend, I mean, that person was important for you, whether that person passed away or you broke up with that person, you still have a bunch of love that you never got to spend with a person, and then it's already there. Um, but anyhow, yes, once again, I appreciate a lot you going into the depth of that answer, and I'm sure that in your book you're gonna go even further with these concepts, and people can maybe look from a different point of view. Maybe it's okay. I think that I can, if I apply this into my life, I have a better shot at having happy, healthy relationship, because at the end of the day, it takes two to tango. It takes both of them to do the work. Because even if one is doing the work but the other one never did, the relationship most likely is not gonna work. But Mark, as a closing question, and I could honestly, I have like so many different other questions. We could go for hours about this topic, but if you could give one piece of advice to anyone struggling in love, what would it be?
I would go back to that same statement that love is a learned skill set. That when you're struggling, it's not because you are somehow lacking as a person. It's not because you don't have value. It's not because you don't deserve love. It's not because that you're not lovable. It's not because that that there's no one out there for you to love. Now, it may be in part because there's people around you that are toxic and are abusive, and you might need to limit or end some relationships to make room for healthy relationships. But at no point should we diminish ourselves thinking we're not worthy of love or that we are not capable of love because we are struggling. It is a learned skill set. And as we learn these components of love and as we put them into practice, we can build healthy, happy, thriving relationships in our life. And so I know it feels discouraging and sometimes it can feel hopeless, but it's not. There is a way to learn love.
Mark Hicks, everyone. Mark, that was a great answer. I love the way that you put it all very beautifully. And yes, I think that it takes time, it takes effort, and we just need to keep going, even if it feels odd, even if it feels uncomfortable, even if it feels weird. But where can people find you? I know that your book is coming out in June, but if they want to just keep up with your work or work with you, anything.
Go to my website. It's markahicks.com. My last name is Hicks. Make sure to get my middle initial in there. It's markahicks.com. My book does come out in June, but it's available for pre-order now. And so I'd love for folks to go to my website and pre-order the book. I also have a free ebook on my website, The 5 Components of Love. It gives a brief overview, just like I have today, of the 5 components of love. And of course, in my book, I go into depth in that of the how-tos and the practical realities of how to live out those 5 components. I also have a contact page on there. I'm available for speaking engagements, workshops, coaching, wherever I can be of service. So feel free to contact me on my website. Go to markahicks.com, and all the links are there to be in touch with all I'm doing.
Awesome. Yes, I'll make sure that I put the website on the video, show notes on YouTube description so people can exactly either click it or type it right on their computers or phones. Once again, Mark, it was a complete pleasure and very insightful conversation. And thank you for coming on the podcast.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.